Before we get started, you're going to want to make sure that Node.js is installed to your system. So navigate to nodejs.org and install it on your system. Once you do that, what you're going to want to do is navigate to MongoDB, and you want to navigate to the Install MongoDB Community Edition. From here, you want to install it based on what you're using. Today, I'm going to be using Windows, so I installed it using these directions. Now you want to go ahead and open Visual Studio Code, and you want to open the folder where you're going to create your project today. And then we want to create a new terminal here, and I'm going to open my command prompt where I'll run all of my commands today, and I can close out of the PowerShell. And instead of using npm to install and manage everything today, we're actually going to use what's called yarn. So to install that, I'm going to use npm I just one time today, -g to globally install this, and I'm going to specify yarn. Go ahead and hit enter and let that install. Now to make sure that installed, I'm going to type out yarn-version, hit enter, and it will show you the version you have installed. This will confirm that yarn is installed. Now we want to go ahead and create a new folder and title this folder Backend, where we're going to put all of our backend code for our database. Then back in our command prompt, we want to cd into our backend directory. And since we installed yarn, we can use it to create a package.json by saying yarn init. And then what we want to do is just hit enter through all of this because we don't want to specify anything specific here, but you guys can if you want. And if we open our backend folder now, you will see our package.json file is created. Now we need to start adding dependencies. So we'll say yarn add express mongoose, and mongoose is going to be specifically for Mongo, body dash parser, cores, and .env. And go ahead and hit enter and let all of those install. And then once that's done, you guys will see that located inside of your package.json under dependencies. Now we're going to add more dependencies using yarn add, but these are going to be specifically for our development environment. So I want to install babel/core, babel/node, and then babel/preset -env. And I also want to install nodemon and specify that these are dev dependencies by using --dev. Hit enter. Now in our package.json, you can see our dev dependencies and our normal dependencies here. And inside of our package.json, if you don't have it already, what we want to do is create a scripts here, and we want to include a script within this, and we're simply going to title this start. And then when we tell it to start, we want to use nodemon, use our index.js, which we'll create in a minute, and then we want to execute babel-node and JavaScript here, and make sure you include your comma. So now back in our command prompt, we're actually going to run this just so I can show you guys how it'll work. So we can say yarn start, but keep in mind we haven't created our index.js or our server yet. So this will not actually do anything and it will just crash. But to get out of this, what we want to do is say Control-C, and that will get us out of the crashed server file here, because again, we don't actually have a server yet. Now in our backend, we want to create a new file, and this is going to be .babelrc. And to make Babel work, we just want to simply paste in our presets code here so that it will run correctly. Again, this will be down below in the source code. Next, we want to create another file called .env to store all of our important variables. Then we want to create a .getignore. And in our .getignore, we want to ignore our node modules and our .env file. Now we can navigate to our .env, and we're going to start off by creating our first variable, and we'll call this mongo_url. And this will be equal to MongoDB followed by localhost / and here's going to be really important because this is going to be the name of your database. So we're going to call this my products DB here. Then we also want to create one more variable called port, and we're going to be using the port of 4000. Now we're done with our get, ignore, and env files. What we can do is go ahead and create a new file, and we're going to call this index.js. And here is where we're going to set up our server. So we want to start off by importing Express. From Express, import Mongoose, and you guys will see that helps us out in Visual Studio Code. Import our body parser, import cores. You guys will see that it's not going to help me out this time, so I'll do it manually. Next, we want to import .env from .env, and then we want to create a comment here because this is where in a moment we'll import our routes. Next, we want to configure our .env using .env.config. We want to create a variable called app so we can run our Express server. And then we want to create a variable to hold our port. So to grab the variable from our env file here is we want to use process.env.our variable name of port. And this port is coming from our .env right here. And then just in case there's an issue with this, we want to include a default port value of 4000 right here. Next, we want to connect to our Mongo database using mongoose.connect. And then we again want to use process.env, but this time we want to use our Mongo, and this is all capitalized, URL. So again, this is coming directly from our env file here, and this line will create our database called my products database, and you guys can name this whatever you like. This is going to be promise based, so we want to use .then, and we need to pass a function in here with no parameters, and we simply want to say console.log and add the string MongoDB connected successfully. And then if this breaks, we want to include a catch, pass our error, and then we want to log the error to our console. So we'll use console.error, say MongoDB connection error, followed by the error code here. Now we need to configure our middleware, so we'll use our variable app.use, and we need to use our body parser .url encoded, and we need to pass in this an object, say extended, and we want this to be true. Then we need to use app.use again, configure our body parser as JSON, and we need to say app.use one more time, and this time we want to use cores. And below this we're going to add a comment called routes config, because we will come back here in a few minutes to configure our routes. Now, using our app, we're going to use .get, and basically we're going to tell our server what we want it to display for us when we send a GET request to it. And we'll put in a slash to use our root URL, and we want to pass a function with the request and response as the parameters here. And when we get a response, we want to send something, and we want to use backticks here and send our app is running on port, and then we want to use our port variable to display what port we are running our server on when we send a GET request. Underneath GET, we want to use app.listen, and this code will run as soon as we start our server. So we need to pass in our port, create a function, and we simply want to log to our server, and we want to pass in backticks here. Your product server is running on port, and then we want to pass in our port variable one more time. So now if we again open up our command prompt, you guys will see that when we first tried to run it, it said app crashed. But now if we run yarn start again, you guys will see that this successfully runs our server, and you guys can see the messages logging out to our console down below. You can see your product server is running on port 4000, which is coming from our app.listen code, and then MongoDB connected successfully which is coming from here. And one more thing I want to point out is that when you're using Mongo is you create databases implicitly in your index.js. So here is where we're creating our database. Next, we want to create a new folder within our backend called models. And within this models folder, we're going to create a file called product model.js. Create another folder within our backend, and we're going to call this controllers. And within this folder, we'll create a file called product controller.js. Next, we want to create one more folder in our backend, and we want to call this routes. Inside of our routes folder, we'll create a file called product routes.js. And basically what we're doing here is setting up all the folders we need to create our Mongo database and run the functions that we want to have. Navigate to your product model.js file, and here is where we'll create the model for our database. So the first thing we need to do is import Mongoose, create a constant variable called schema, and make this equal to mongoose.schema. Now we want to create a variable called product schema and make this equal to a new schema using our schema variable. And to create our schema, we want to use parentheses followed by an object. And the first key we want to have is our SKU. So we want to type out SKU, create an object, and we can specify the type we want this to take. So we want this to be a number, and this is also a required field when adding something to your database. So we'll say required followed by SKU is required. And then our SKU needs to be a unique value every time we add something. So we'll say unique followed by the Boolean true. Include a comma. And then to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it 5 more times. And the last one, you don't want to have your comma here. And you guys can see that I still have my terminal open to make sure my server is still running correctly, and NodeMon is automatically restarting it every time I make a change. Now that we have this duplicated, I can just go ahead and change the name of the keys for each one of these. So I want this to be name, but I don't want it to have a number. This needs to be a string instead. And then I can just change this to name is required, and it does not need to be unique. And then I'll go ahead and change out the rest of these. And keep in mind, you can add as many or remove as many as you want here. Now you guys can see I have all the information included that I want to have in each entry inside of my database. So I have SKU, name, price, description, image, URL, and alt. So this is all information for our products here that we can eventually use to add our products to the database. And then once we have it in our database, we will display it on our front end, and we'll get to all of that soon. Next, we want to create our collection based on the schema that we just created. So we'll say export default followed by mongoose.model, and this is going to take 2 parameters here, and the first one is going to be the name of the collection in our database. And for our product collection, we want to use our product schema that we just created as the model here. So now what you guys are going to notice is that we're saying we want the name of our collection to be product, but the way Mongo is going to read this is it's going to make it product lowercase and also make it plural. So the way you will see it in your database will be products. That'll do it for our product model.js. What we can do is navigate to product controller, and here is basically where we're going to create all the functions where we will be able to add products, delete products, and make any changes we want to our database. So to start off here, we need to import our product, and again, that's what we just created from our /models/product model. And first we want to be able to get our products. So we'll start off with export, create a const called get products, And this is going to be a asynchronous function here where we pass our request and our response. If you guys want a tutorial in async functions, I'll leave a link up top and down below for you guys where I explain it more. And inside of this, what we want to do is use a try catch, create a variable called products, make that equal to await. And again, await is used because we're using an async function. And then we want to use our product to find something. And here we simply want to pass in an empty object. And since we're declaring this as an empty object here, it's going to find everything in this specific collection here. And now we want to respond as a JSON with our products. And then we need to include a catch, pass in our error in case there's a problem with this. We want to say response.status, pass in 500. We want to return this error as a JSON. And inside of an object, we want to specify message, and we want the message to be server error. Next, we want to create a controller to actually add a product. So we'll say export const. We want to add a product, singular here. Use our async function again, pass our request and our response. And here we want to create a variable called new product. Make that equal to a new product here. We want to use the request.body. Then we want to use a try catch again. Create a variable called product. Make that equal to await followed by our new product variable. And we simply want to save this to our database. And then we want to respond as a JSON with our product. Now we can specify our catch, and this time we'll actually pass in an error to it, and we'll simply respond with the error if there's a problem. Now we'll go ahead and create the last controller that we'll use in this video. So we'll say export const, and we want to delete a product. Make that equal to async again, and then again we can just pass our request and our response here and use our try and catch. We want to await our product, and we want to simply delete one. And keep in mind, you can create a controller where you can delete many, but we'll only do delete one in this video. And we simply want to delete it based on the ID that we enter. And keep in mind, when you're using Mongo, when you enter a product into your database, it automatically generates a unique ID for each entry. So that's what we're using here. We want to say rec.params for our request, and we want to specify our product ID. And then this time we want to respond as a JSON with a message of product deleted. And then for our catch, we'll just go ahead and copy what we did up here and paste it because it's exactly the same. Now that we have all the controllers that we need for today's video, we want to go to our product routes.js and start configuring this file. And in this one, we want to start off with an import, and here is where we're going to import all the controllers that we just made, starting with get products, then add product, and lastly, delete product. And this is all going to be coming from our /controllers/product controller. And here we're going to specify our routes as a constant, pass in our app as the parameter, and then we want to use app.route. And here we want to pass where our product database is. So we want to use /products, and then we want to use our get functionality, and we want to pass in our get products function or controller. And then to add a product, we need to use our post method and include our add product controller. And then we need to use a different route for our delete product controller because we're actually deleting a specific product. So what we want to do is specify app.route, and then we again want to use /products, but we want to delete this single product based on a specific product ID that we specified here in our route. And underneath this, we can just use our delete method and specify our delete product controller. And then we need to export our routes using export default routes. Now we have our controllers, model, and routes all set up. We can navigate back to our index.js. And here, where I left the comment routes, is where we're going to start off by importing it. So we'll import our routes from /routes/product routes. And then we simply need to configure our routes for our application. So we'll say routes, and we want to pass in app. And you guys will see, based on everything that we did, our server and our database is still functioning correctly here. If you guys have any errors at this point so far, go back through the source code and make sure that you entered everything correctly. Next, we need to install two things that we're going to use to test and verify that our database is working. First, we want to navigate to Postman download, go to download Postman, make sure this is at postman.com. Again, this will all be in the description down below, and download it for your system here. Next, we want to download Studio 3T, so we'll search for Studio 3T download, go to studio3t.com and download it for your system. And again, I'm using Windows, but they have it for any system that you might be using. Once you have these installed, go ahead and start off by opening Postman. And once you guys have Postman open, it's going to look a little bit different for you. If you haven't used it before, you're not going to have all these requests that you have made before like I do. But what you want to do is create a new request here. And over here on the left, it'll let you choose what request you want to use. And in our case here, we want to test our GET. So what we want to do is type in localhost 4000, and we already have our server running. Make sure that you have your server running or this will not work. And what we want to do is send a GET request to our server. And what you're going to notice is it returns our app is running on port 4000, which is the code that we included in our index.js file right here. So now we can see that our requests are successfully submitting to the server. Now go ahead and open Studio 3T, and in the top left, you're gonna see Connect. Go ahead and click on that. You guys will see any databases that you've connected to in the past here, but if it's your first time using it, it will be blank. Now we want to click New Connection, and what we need to do is specify MongoDB followed by our local host, and this is going to be 27017 for our URL. Go ahead and click Next, and you guys will see your connection has been successfully auto-configured. If you get an error here, you guys typed in something incorrectly, go ahead and click OK. Now we want to go ahead and name our connection. So I'll simply name this video since it's for this video today. Go ahead and click Save. Now you guys can see that our video connection is available. Go ahead and click on that and then click Connect. Now on the left, you guys will know that you're connected to the right one because you'll see the name that you specified. And in our case, it's video followed by your localhost URL. And you guys will be able to see all the other databases that I've created in the past outside of this video, but the one that we want to use today is my products DB here. So we can go ahead and open it with this little arrow, and you guys can see your collections here. And in our case, we only have one collection. Now to actually go into our database and see the context of it, we can go to our IntelliShell up here, click on that, and we want to go ahead and accept that message. And what we want to do before we run database.get collection is we want to use our my products DB like so. And just to run this first line here, I'm going to go ahead and click this option here that says run statement at cursor, and you guys will see already on DB my products DB, and then we can go ahead and run our database.get collection query here using this same line again, and it won't return anything yet because we haven't actually added anything to this database. So it will just show up as blank for now. Now, before we actually add anything to this database using Postman, we're going to navigate to AWS, and we're going to use AWS today to store our images and create a URL file that we can add to our database. So I'll go ahead and go in here. If you haven't created an account, create a free one. What we're doing today should not cost you anything at all unless you add a large amount of data, so don't be too worried about that. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and sign into the console. Once you guys are signed in, navigate to console home here. Once you're here, what you want to do is navigate to what's called S3, and this is simply scalable storage in the cloud. Click on this, and then once we get here, you guys can see that it says general purpose buckets. What we want to do is create a new bucket, and you can see I already have one created down here. But for us, we're going to create a new one. I'm going to call this vid-pics. And then scroll down here. We don't want to block public access because this is not anything we're worried about security. It's just images. And then down here at the bottom, we just want to create our bucket. Now you guys can see we have the vid-pics bucket here. Go ahead and click on that. And we're going to select upload, and what we want to do is add files. And now I'm simply going to select the pictures that I want to add to this bucket in AWS. I'll select 3 for now, and you guys will see that it shows your 3 files here, or however many you added, and then we can go ahead and hit upload. And this will go ahead and take a second to upload. Now up here, we can navigate back to our vid-pics bucket. You guys will see that all 3 of the pictures that we want are added here. From here, navigate to permissions. We want to navigate down here, make sure block all public access is off, and underneath bucket policy, select edit. We want to add the following code with our version and statement. Again, this will be in the source code, but here for our resource, what we want to do is change products-Kalman web to the name of our bucket, which is vid-pics. And once we're there, we can go ahead and select save changes down below. And you guys will see our code is displaying in AWS here. Now that's all we have to do to configure this for our images. And we can go back to objects. And when we click on object here, I'll go ahead and right click and open link in a new tab. What you guys will see is that we have an object URL. If we go ahead and select this, you guys will see that our image is available through a public URL here. Now what we want to do is open our product model.js back up so we make sure we get all the correct values here. And what we can go about doing now is changing our request in Postman to a post request here. Now navigate back to Postman, and instead of a get request, we want to select a post request here, and we want to add this to our My Products database. So we'll change that here, and then we want to go down here to where it says body, and we want to change this to x-www-form URL encoded. And here it will let us add our key value pairs. And what we want to do for each key is we want to follow what we set up in our product model.js or our schema here. So for our first key, what we want to do is call this our SKU. And for this one, our first SKU value will be 1000. And keep in mind, we have this set to unique. Then we want our name. I'll include a name here. Then we want a price. So I'll include a price of whatever I want here, followed by a description. And you guys are starting to get the point. So I'll go ahead and fill out the rest of these, and make sure that if you have it set to type number, you add a number, and string, you set it to a correct string value as I'm doing here. This would be a string here, and this would be a number. And down here for image URL, what we're going to do is navigate back to your AWS, and over here, you guys can go ahead and just copy this URL. And again, to get to it, just click on one of these, open in a new tab, and it will be available right here underneath object URL. So now we can just go ahead and paste that URL here. And if you guys have an error, make sure that all of these keys are correctly labeled, and for any unique values that you need, those are unique, and you're entering proper number and string values where you selected them. And so now what we can do is make sure that, once again, this is in post, And we can go ahead and send this into our database by clicking send. This is the name of our database, but what we want to do is send this obviously into our database, but into our products collection. So I'll go ahead and change this to products. And now if I go ahead and hit send, it will work instead of me getting this error. So now you guys can see that it will return our response, or what we sent in to our database here, as an object. And what you want to do now is you want to go back to Studio 3T, and we can simply run this line again here by clicking this button. And now you guys will see that we have an entry into our database. And like I said earlier in this video, Mongo automatically creates a unique ID for every entry in your database, which you guys can see here. Now I can get rid of products at the end here, change this to a GET request, send it to my server, and you guys can see that it is still successfully running on port 4000. So you want to make sure every once in a while that it's still working if you have an error. So now we'll go back to post, and for the rest of these products, I'll go ahead and add them. And for this case, we're only going to have 3. I added all 3 of my products to the database using Postman. Now I can go back to Studio 3T, and to update what it's displaying here is I can run the DB get collection again. So go ahead and click that, and now you guys can see that I have 3 products with unique IDs and unique SKU values, and all of the information here, including the image URL that we will pull in a minute to display on the front end. Now I want to show you guys how to delete something from this database. So let's say I want to delete this product that I just added here. What I want to do is select this ID by right-clicking, copy value as text, going back to Postman, changing our request to delete, and then in our products collection, we want to delete a specific product with a specific ID. So we'll just go ahead and add a slash, add our ID here. We don't need this to be a form URL encoded, so I'll just change this to none. And then once I go ahead and hit send, you guys will see that we return product deleted. And if we go back to Studio 3T, run our query again, you guys will see that we only have 2 products in the database. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and add back in that product using our post method, and then re-enabling our form URL encoded, getting rid of this custom ID here, and then just sending it back into our database. You guys will see I can add and delete as many products or items as I need to here. So you guys can see that now it's back in our database. Tap here to see what happens next.